Hi everyone, and welcome to the Commerce.js booth. My name is Andrew, and I'm one of the founders of Commerce.js. We are an API-first headless e-commerce platform that lets brands and developers build experiential commerce. So I'm joined here today by Adam Sturrock, and Adam, I'm going to hand it over to you to let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for having me. I'm Adam Sturrock, one of the founders of Moltin. I guess before Moltin, I was a developer a long time ago, like 7, 8 years ago, working on sort of Magento, Shopify builds and that kind of thing. And we founded Moltin sort of out of that, I guess.
Awesome.
Um,
Hey, well, thanks so much for being here. And we're here to talk about headless commerce. And I remember when Moltin first came onto the scene, and you were kind of the first truly headless and API first commerce platform that the market had seen. And that's before headless was even a thing. So I wonder if you could tell people more about how you came about starting Moltin and what was sort of the driving ideas behind it.
yeah, like I said, I was working at an agency, working on sort of Magento, Shopify, build sort of in that SMB space. And sort of as a developer, sort of scratch your own itch sort of problem. Like we would find ourselves running dozens and hundreds of these different sites, all on different versions of the different platforms available at the time. And we even built our own DIY stuff ourselves, and we would sort of see those same issues coming up. And sort of with Shopify, we were quite limited in what we could sort of do, and sort of we'd end up bending and breaking these platforms to our will a little bit. And that obviously leads to like more maintenance issues. Yeah, so we saw what Stripe and Twilio were doing, and thought like maybe naive at the time, but we thought the three of us, Jamie, Chris, and I, what would it look like to build an e-commerce API? Basically, turn the entire e-commerce platform into APIs, and that would sort of, in our I guess idea was like it would solve a lot of the issues in terms of upgrades and like maintenance issues, I guess. But you wouldn't have to like constantly update the versions and sort of fix payment gateway issues and that kind of thing. That would sort of all be taken off the developers' hands, and they would just be allowed to implement APIs basically. And I guess it was quite when we founded Molten, like we went through an accelerator in the UK called Ignite 100, and we spent like 3 months just building sort of from scratch all the features and functions. It was sort of PHP monolith internally at the time for version one, and so when we launched that, surprisingly, like we had like developer interest from day one. People were googling for e-commerce APIs even back then, and they landed on Molten. There wasn't anything else really available. I think sort of maybe the only one that I could think of would be sort of maybe Foxy Cart. Sort of took a similar approach, but it was sort of XML and things I think back then. So yeah,
Interesting. Yeah, that's super interesting to hear the beginnings of Molten and what drove you and the team to take a big step into making e-commerce and the internet a better place to build and sell on. So I guess we're here today to talk about headless commerce. And as someone that's been on the bleeding edge of e-commerce and e-commerce development for well over 8 years, it'd be great if you could explain in your own words what headless commerce means to you.
yeah. So I guess headless wasn't really a thing. It sort of evolved, and that term came. I'm not sure where it came from exactly, but to me, it's just a separation of the front end from the back end. So the back end sort of has all of the data and the scaling and sort of all the servers behind the scenes. And then on the front end, that could be anything, whether that's a website, that could be a mobile app, it could be sort of an IoT application, sort of anything really. That's sort of the simplest definition of headless, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like the folks in the content management space really carved out that headless term, and then it sort of transitioned in the last 3 or 4 years into commerce. So
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
always interesting to see.
It's a bit of a strange term as well. Just in terms of like headless, it's like you actually do have maybe multiple heads
Yeah,
as well.
it,
So it's,
it feels like a real transition term. Like people are still trying to understand what this new way of building and selling online is, and this is kind of something that's caught on. But um, I know us here at Commerce.js and other vendors are kind of like, well, it's not the best term, but it's something that's stuck. So we're kind of running with it for now.
Yeah, I guess like it makes people ask what does that mean? What is it? And that kind of is I guess a point of differentiation rather than some long-winded explanation of what what an API is and the separation of the front end from the back end. So,
Yeah, because pretty quickly you can get into the weeds and get super technical, and then people's eyes glaze over, and that's that.
yeah.
So, yeah, I guess if we can get a good understanding around what headless is, then really quickly people know what we're talking about. Um, and so, yeah, you've been at the infrastructure level of e-commerce for a long time, and you've seen a lot of businesses over the year. So, I've wanted to ask you for a long time, what would you say are the common reasons why businesses and brands choose to decouple their e-commerce and go headless?
So we sort of figured this out over time at Moltin. It took us a little while to sort of look at the user base and sort of see what was working and what wasn't working, and because obviously a lot of developers want to try shiny new toys in tech. But the ones that really stood out for me, and we sort of looked at this until 2018, 2019, there's sort of two, I guess, camps. One was the front end experiences, those customer experiences that people are trying to create was they were trying to sort of differentiate from the sort of cookie cutter websites, those
Mm,
sort of grid based web stores, and sort of go down that more experiential route.
mm,
And that would be sort of very customer centric or very visual. And then the other side, I guess, is sort of the more, I guess, complex business processes and sort of maybe B2B use cases where they had a lot more complexity behind the scenes.
mm,
And sort of headless, obviously, there's that separation from the front end and the back end, but even in the back end itself, that gives a lot of flexibility in terms of how integrations get pulled together and in defining those, I guess, those internal workflows um, to like fit your business case, basically.
mm.
So
And
people
that's
could sort of weave their code in and out of that.
exactly, and the idea that their code fits um, around the platform, and that they decide what sort of business and functionality they want to build, as opposed to them having a really predefined scope of what they can, and then having to make their business work around the technology.
Yeah, exactly. I guess it kind of comes down to sort of what is an e-commerce platform.
Mm,
I've had a lot of sort of thoughts over the past few years to like really question what it is, because when you look at like Magento, for example, or Shopify, it's sort of they present to you a framework, um, and you might get sort of lured in by the features and functionalities, but really it's the framework and how do you customize, how do you extend that is what really matters. You sort of have that tick box of like products, cart, checkout, orders, and all the different features like search and reviews, wish lists, etc. But sort of
mm,
the fundamentals are, do you provide the right hooks and the ability to sort of extend the data models and that kind of thing to sort of turn that e-commerce platform into the sort of the right solution for your business, I guess.
mm.
And obviously, sort of in the agency space where I was, that's what a lot of the time is spent customizing those platforms, and you get a lot of interesting and weird use cases. Um,
Yeah, I bet a lot of like Frankenstein implementations where it's like you're really pushing it to the edge when it
mhm.
should be used for that.
Yeah, and then yeah, as you sort of push it to its edge, you might delve into the core a little bit or something that you're not really meant to, and that
Mm,
sort of leads to a lot of headaches. Sort of, but obviously with sort of headless, the APIs are typically like more closed off, and you don't get to tamper with the internals so much, which is probably a good thing, I think. You shouldn't sort of embed your logic inside the ecom platform. You should sort of be rapid around the edges that gives you access at certain points throughout that like checkout flow, for example. And yeah, you don't want to. It kind of, I guess, it instills good practices at the architecture layer.
mm. Yeah,
I
I
thought,
think ultimately you want to give people options, right? And to access the core of your platform if and when they need it, but not like one or the other or completely shutting it off.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
that's what we're seeing here. Folks wanting to do things that other platforms don't let them do, and they want that control. And so when you have a headless API first e-commerce platform, they sort of are rubbing their hands together, going, "Oh, great! These are the things I can do that
Mhm.
our current monolithic platform wasn't allowing us to achieve." So,
Yeah, it's sort of when you go headless and you build API first, you have 100% coverage of all possible functions that you might need to get access to. Whereas sort of a monolithic platform that sort of was traditionally, either hosted in the cloud or you hosted it on your own servers,
Mm.
you would essentially have a limited scope of APIs that you might be able to hook into, or like modules for frameworks or plugin frameworks that you'd use. But that sort of limited the scope as to what you could do with those products. And that's sort of I guess the beauty of sort of headless is that you kind of an API first is you get um, like everything you need. So even for example, the Moltin dashboard, I'm sure you guys are the same. Like the dashboards are built with the same APIs that the customers have access to.
Yeah.
So it's a great way of dog fooding the product a little bit and sort of building out and sort of seeing how it works. Just, again, like the dashboard is just another, I guess, experience layer for a different type of user, not a customer, but
Yeah.
an administrator. And they need similar endpoints, obviously some extra management things inside of it, but they still need the same view endpoints and things.
Mm. And then you give people the ability to build their own dashboards or just
Hmm.
admin views for whatever context, because everything, every part of the platform is accessible via an API.
Hmm.
It's pretty cool to say that we have a headless dashboard. I think that's quite a cool statement to claim. Um,
Yeah, definitely. And it's super. I guess both internally and externally for people to like understand that everything that they see in the dashboard is built by those APIs, and they could build the same thing if they wanted to,
mm,
and get some interesting ideas for like customer journeys that they could potentially create. And it's not like you said, it's not necessarily just about your dashboard either. It sort of shows that maybe you could embed that functionality into an existing CMS they're using, or
mm,
maybe a Zendesk support tool, for example. You could think about all these different, I guess, personas and roles and jobs to be done. Maybe it's I remember some customers sort of had their own warehouses and things, and they would have their warehouse staff with their like tablets, and they would have their like inventory that's available on the web store that they can go through and actually update sort of in real time as they're like picking orders off the shelves and like dispatching them. They could just like hit a button, and that would sort of update for them. And that would be like a specialized view just for their business.
yeah, I think it's a really super like powerful selling point, in that you not only have control on the front end, but also the back end for your admin or the folks that are running your business, and to be able to customize their experience. And then like going back to dog fooding your own API, it also puts you on the same level as the developers that are working with your platform. So
Mhm.
when we build stuff and we get a bug, we know that everyone else is having that same experience. So we're on the same ground floor as you as you're building your integration, which is another
Yeah.
reason a headless backend is pretty powerful.
Exactly, and it kind of also um, shows like some of obviously there's like strengths and weaknesses for headless, and it kind of shows some of the weaknesses too, and then you can work to address those within your own product,
Mm,
or maybe it's in your documentation, for example, where you need to improve on the quality to help people, because like it's very easy when you're building an API product to make assumptions on the types of users you have.
sure.
But like if you can build good documentation that any developer can use, it can sort of empower a whole new set of developers to build like new experiences. So like when you look at like Magento, for example, and they have like certification programs and things like that shouldn't need to exist for an API an
Mm,
API headless product because it's a lot simpler. There's a lot less to like have to figure out and work out. You don't have to figure out hosting and servers and like the maintenance side of that, and you just have to know a little bit of JavaScript and just know how to make a few API calls and then HTML, CSS. It's like really, really, really simple. That obviously like kind of leads into the Jamstack that we have now. But
mm,
um, even someone like that's not even gone to college or university can like still pick up and learn a tool really quickly.
yeah.
And that sort of is sort of I guess democratizing and lowering the barrier to entry in terms of like the level of skill set and time obviously to be spent to actually build an experience. I remember going into that agency before Moltin, like you'd have to work there for a few months before you're allowed to touch like live production code and that kind of thing.
Right.
Just simply because like if you touch something and something broke, it would be a nightmare to sort of resolve.
Yeah. Well, there's that learning curve, right, where it's like
Mm.
a couple of months maybe where you're finding your feet.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like again, it kind of goes back to the founders of Molten, and so we looked at Stripe and Twilio, and there wasn't a certification program for those. It's just you could sign up for the service and you could just like plug it in basically, write a few lines of code, and that sort of was the beauty of it. It was I mean, I'm not the greatest developer like in the world. Like I can just do enough to get by, and like that was super empowering to me.
Mm.
Um, so like it should be. That was kind of one of the founding principles of Moltin was that it was accessible to every developer.
Yeah, I think that's a great mission. We're doing the same thing here at Commerce.js,
Mhm.
trying to introduce custom e-commerce development to a wider spectrum of people. You don't just have to be a senior engineer or a really experienced
Mhm.
JavaScript developer, but you can sort of come straight out of a boot camp and start building stuff, which is
Mhm.
pretty
Yeah,
empowering.
exactly. Like it was kind of surprising to sort of see some of our customers and how much they could accomplish with so little as
Mm,
well. So some of our earlier customers were like one or two developers in house, or maybe they were like the like a marketing guy that was doing a little bit of code on the side, and they could
yeah.
actually like accomplish quite a lot with very little in terms of code.
Mm,
And then obviously you can kind of compare that to like the hundreds of thousands of lines of code from Magento and like figuring out all the modules and everything else. It was kind of like night and day. I remember I wrote a blog post and still had the two code um, like repositories like summarized as like number of lines of code and the file structures and everything else, and sort of on the headless side when you abstract away all of that complex like commerce logic to the
mm,
back end, and you're just doing like simple like CRUD, like create, read, update, deletes
mhm,
to the data that's inside of it. It's a lot cleaner. Yeah, you end up with like maybe a couple dozen files, not thousands.
mm.
And that.
And ultimately, that means that you're spending less time on the integration and more time on the
Mhm.
experience or just other parts of the business if you're a smaller team. Um,
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of focus on what, I guess, what sets you apart, what differentiates you from everyone else, and you're not sort of picking a template off of a shelf. Obviously, you can do that still if you want to, but you get a lot more freedom in sort of what you can create, um, and sort of fit the needs of your business, basically. And I think that's like the big thing in terms of what's been driving headless, especially like obviously the past probably 2 3 years, like every e-commerce platform is now claiming to be headless, and everyone's building out APIs.
mm,
Um, and obviously there's varying degrees of quality inside of an API itself.
yeah.
Um, and that's a great thing to see sort of as an industry that we're all progressing towards headless,
Mm.
um, because it'll just empower everybody, I think, to
Yeah,
do more.
I remember the blog post you wrote at Molten about having bolt-on APIs, and that's kind
Mm.
of the like when an API is an afterthought to a platform, and they're like, oh, we need to make this easier for devs to work with. First,
Yeah,
first being an API first platform where it's just like, well, these are just the byproduct of us existing.
yeah, exactly. It's sort of, I mean, even when Molten was founded, like Magento had APIs, but
Mm,
it's sort of how were the APIs consumed, and
mm,
Magento wasn't really SaaS then. Obviously, so you've got sort of Adobe Commerce Cloud now, but it's the same thing. It's just sort of hosting that Magento instance in the cloud. It doesn't necessarily make it a clean and easy to use API. You still have to sort of figure out like the modules and everything else, just somewhere else basically to think about it. It's still there, sort of lurking in the background. So yeah.
nice, interesting. Um, so I wonder if we could like sort of go on a bit of a time machine and for those that are new to headless, it'd be cool to talk a little bit about the evolution of e-commerce and kind of where we're at today and how we've
Mhm.
gone from the monolithic to this sort of first stab at headless, and now the sort of like revival of a better way to build modern e-commerce. Um,
Hmm.
what do you
So
what?
yeah, again, how far back shall we go? I guess it's like we could go
Yeah,
back to like the dawn of the internet, I guess, or the Wild West.
yeah,
Like was
maybe
it?
like I mean around like mid '90s, Amazon coming on
Mm,
online, and then platforms like Shopify 2004, I
mhm,
believe, as like a good starting point where it's like, and the way I talk about it with folks is back then you took an offline business online, and that's what these e-commerce platforms were kind of built for, and that requires a very different set of tools and functionality to get a whole retail business selling online. Whereas now that's flipped in that businesses start online, and then if they do really well, they open up a physical store. So I guess that would be another way to sort of frame the transition. But I guess what are
mhm.
your sort of observations of the last 15 years.
I guess we've gone through a few different phases in my eyes. So before sort of there's a lot of adjacent technologies that sort of like a natural evolution over time in the technology space that sort of like build on top of each other and sort of accelerate different trends.
Mm,
But sort of before cloud was even a thing, you sort of had sort of self-hosted e-commerce platforms that you would sort of you buy the software and then you would stick it on a server yourself and sort of run and maintain that. IBM WebSphere, Oracle ATG, that kind of thing, and then obviously Magento. Um, and they were kind of the first stabs at an e-commerce platform, and like you said, got a lot of people to transition. And
mm,
it was a lot of I guess replicating what was happening in the physical world being replicated into the digital with like those product shelves and categorizations and everything else. It was a direct mirror of what was happening. And then yeah, like you said, sort of the SaaS wave started to build with Shopify. Um, Again, sort of it was still sort of a boxed solution with all the features and functionality and a few plugins to like add on, a few extensions to like different functions and features. And that was sort of it was like the flip side of the coin of like trying to address some of those issues with sort of self-hosting and all the maintenance burdens and headaches and security concerns that kind of come with that. Is that Shopify and to some extent, I guess, BigCommerce Essentials would sort of take away some of that hassle and energy that your organization might spend. And I guess there's two sides to that. So like Magentos of the world were great, I guess, for like businesses that were trying to forge their own path and trying to customize. And then for those stores that wanted to get moving really quickly and maybe didn't have as much development experience or developers on board, they could pick up Shopify sort of out of the box and get a store up and running really quickly. Um, and then I guess more recently, we've gone through a couple of phases of headless, I guess. So there was sort of the first wave, sort of 2013 with with Moltin, sorry, and Commerce Tools and ElasticPath, I guess, where they sort of took that concept of like the full commerce platform and sort of separated that front end from that back end, and they served all of these different features as APIs, all connected together on the back end. It was kind of like still monolithic. Also, all three of these were still monolithic, and then even sort of as we realized and built that out at Molten, we began to sort of question like the the scaling nature of that. Like when you get to like Black Friday levels of traffic for some really big brands,
yeah.
that it becomes really challenging to scale a full platform. We sort of saw our PHP monolith beginning to come under some strain in
Mm,
like 2014, 2015, and then we did we sort of moved to address that pretty quickly and started to like look at microservices as a way of sort of scaling up individual services. So say the product pages were being hit.
yeah.
Obviously, people may have caches on their front ends, but Molten's APIs, their product catalog would still get hit occasionally. So we'd have to figure out how do we scale that catalog service up, for example, or like even just the breadth of like products in a catalog or the number of like variant products and things as well, complexity there. Obviously, the cart service can get hit and hit quite heavily, or the promotion service and the checkout. So how do you scale those individually?
Mm,
And that transition for us, we sort of went from PHP monolith to a lot of different languages internally, and sort of I guess that kind of sealed in that Molten was going to always be sort of closed source because it was going to be almost impossible for a single developer to run
mm,
all of the systems and also kind of make sense of it and actually contribute. So we sort of made that decision to remain closed source then, but um, yeah, sort of as we went to those microservices, we saw a lot more scalability for our customers as
mm,
we sort of transitioned to V2. And that's sort of like, I guess, is sort of we're not quite. I feel like we're on the path to microservices now. We still have vendors like Commerce Tools and ElasticPath that have like these like platform centric approaches where they turn these monolithic platforms into sort of APIs and headless. And there's sort of this new wave that's sort of I guess occurring right now where we have sort of best of breed services where you might have a catalog service, you might have a promotion engine, and obviously like you'd have some product like you guys, you have like the core commerce capabilities, but you don't heavily invest into all the categories, and sort of that's how Norton started to sort of shape up at the end of last year.
mm.
Um, sort of moving away from that sort of platform centric approach to more best of breed and was kind of leaning into that and what does that mean? because sort of as you sort of question what an e-commerce platform is, and you realize even Shopify and Magento have the same thing happens. Like the executives or the decision maker will purchase the platform thinking they're going to use the whole thing, and then like 3 4 years down the line they've installed dozens of plugins and they've replaced all different kind of components to get to the try to get to the answer to like what they wanted as a business to kind of evolve the way to some sort of end state, and then eventually there's enough sort of pressure and the cracks begin to show in the platform that it's wasn't really designed with that level of extensibility in mind.
Mm.
And that's kind of when you kind of get into this replatforming cycle every like 4 or 5 years where you kind of blame the platform and go and find another platform.
Yeah.
And we saw that firsthand at Moltin, and I kind of saw it in the agency space as well. Um, and sort of that line of questioning kind of goes back to kind of like, well, if you're gonna go down that route every time with a commerce platform and you're going to end up wanting to extend it and customize it to your use case, why not just sort of start as you mean to end and just
Mm.
allow people to pick up these APIs like from day one, so that people are walking in and knowing what they're purchasing,
Yeah.
as opposed to being lured in by sort of feature functionality. Because a lot of e-commerce platforms will build a lot of functionality, and kind of Molten slipped into this a little bit.
Mm.
And you can't do everything really well.
No.
You can do everything and do it, mediocre, and it'll be good enough for a few people, but then eventually, like someone's going to want to extend it or upgrade it and pick some different services.
Mm.
Um, and that's kind of why the plugin marketplaces exist and the modules and things on other platforms. But sort of in this new headless world, there isn't such a thing as a plugin anymore. That doesn't really exist. You have serverless functions where you're just piping data from one service to another. Um, and that's sort of that's empowering too. So you can think about sort of on the front end, there's all these great um, like with the Jamstack, there's all these great tools that sort of empower the developers on the front end. On the back end, the same thing's happening where you don't need to learn a plugin or a module framework for a commerce platform anymore, where you have proprietary knowledge and like things you have to learn. You can just pick up a generic tool like a serverless function and write it
Mm.
in in Node or Go or something, and it's maybe 50 lines of code, and you're just translating from one abstract service to another.
Yeah.
And that's really empowering too. We saw a lot of Molten customers ended at first we thought it was sort of a nightmare, that like our customers would like not use Molten for all these different features and functions, and then we've kind of realized over time that actually it created systems that were sort of a greater sum than all of its parts combined, and then
Mm.
sort of yeah, I think even the customers that were sort of going through that at the time felt like it was sort of devaluing sort of what they bought into at Molten a little bit, but sort of as that evolved for us, I think some of them began to really lean into, okay, I can pick whatever tools I want.
Yeah.
As both a developer and a business, I can go and pick the best CMS. I can go and pick the best e-commerce parts like the cart and checkout. I can go and select a PIM if I need to get a PIM for my merchandising team.
Mm.
If I need a promotion engine, I can go and swap that out. If I need a payment gateway, obviously payments is kind of that space is quite mature at this point. There are hundreds of payment gateways, but being able to just swap those in and out really easily as well, that kind of thing, um, it sort of allows people to assemble the solution that fits their business needs, and then
Yeah.
you also don't get stuck into this, I guess, this replatforming that
Mm.
happens every 4 or 5 years. It's you get to take say like the catalog service that you have with your e-commerce platform isn't up to scratch anymore for whatever reason. It's sort of groaning under the weight of your like business requirements. You can decide, okay, I'm going to go and implement a PIM now, and it's not going to be like a 6 month, 12 month implementation cycle. You could implement a PIM in like a few days. It's not as much of a heavy lift anymore, which is kind of surprising, I guess, because like I don't think because like when we first went into headless, a lot of people were like, oh, rebuilding the front end and the back end from scratch sounds like a lot of work, a lot of effort. In reality, like it depends on like sort of how you define the scope of work and how much time and energy you want to invest into that.
Mm.
So how long is a piece of string? Because like we would see some customers launch in like weeks, like a matter of weeks from like idea like coming in to having a fully fledged like website with like fulfillment and everything else behind the scenes like completed
Mm.
very quickly. And they would obviously make trade-offs just to get to that launch window and things, but then within a year or so they could continue to build out with like one or two developers and just get to get a solution that would work for their business. So it's not really a case of um, that headless is slower. And I think it's sort of the opposite. Um,
Oh, for sure. And I think also that when businesses are going, oh, we want this functionality, and they're often poking the platform, going, hey, we need this. But instead, with a headless backend, at least they can write their own logic and build that on top of the platform in many cases.
I think that can be daunting for some people, but I don't think that's necessarily has to be the case.
No,
When you look at some like example code and you can actually make sense of it, even as like a non-technical person, like that's like amazing that you can actually see this is how my architecture that I'm assembling myself is actually functioning together.
mm,
Um, that is like surprising. And I think also sort of as if you're running an e-commerce platform, an e-commerce business, I should say, you should kind of know how the platform works a little bit under the hood because it does kind of matter. You'll kind of know sort of where the issues are ahead of time,
mm,
where things maybe are like either not up to the business requirements, and then you can start planning that out ahead of time and being a bit more proactive, as opposed to sort of reacting to kind of like things further down the line. Say like you pick a full like monolithic platform, and then like 6 months later, kind of something breaks, and you realize you need to like fix something. That can be sort of a nightmare for a business, and I think sort of headless allows you to like risk manage a lot more than sort of in the past.
yeah, I think there's still a lot of work to do in the headless space around understanding and visualizing all of those different services and um, functionality and how they work together to deliver a business.
Yeah,
Yeah, and like
that was
no one's got the same business as you. Like everyone's got
mm,
different requirements, different parts of the world, um, and ultimately they want to give off a different experience to their customers. So everyone's e-commerce stack is going to be different, and it exists in people's heads up there, but yeah, there still isn't a great way to sort of map this and track when things need to be upgraded or where there are potential bottlenecks. So
yeah
that's
we
sort of
saw
the challenge of the like remainder of the second wave of headless. I think it's really helping people contextualize and understand what a fully decoupled e-commerce stack looks like.
yeah we sort of when we were trying to sell Molten at first, it was sort of people weren't quite sure what they were purchasing because there was no visual front end at the time to see. Like they would have
Right.
to build that themselves, so they would just log into like a back end dashboard, and it's like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
They wouldn't know what sort of they were like buying basically, and that was a big challenge for people. And I think like we kind of cottoned onto that a little bit, and then we started to create diagrams for people as we sort of spoke to them about their needs, and
Mm.
we built up a framework eventually about all the different components that you might need, and then that would sort of allow people to kind of more openly sort of figure out, okay, this is where Molten fits in my mental model as to what they provide, and also sort of setting the boundaries as to yes, Molten had a product service or Molten had a order service, for example, and to know where the boundaries ended and where they would need to say sometimes that catalog service would be like enough for somebody, other times it would be sort of an immediate, oh, you don't have this feature or functionality, and then you can kind of pivot into, okay, well, you're going to need to get a PIM, or you're going to
Mm.
need to get an order management system, or whatever it might be, and then you can start to create a diagram sort of in conjunction with the retailer or the brand, and sort of be on the same side of the table as them, sort of solutionizing for their business. And I think sort of retailers and brands really appreciate that because like I'm sort of in the position that I'm at right now, where sort of Molten was acquired by ElasticPath, and sort of I've stepped away and started to help people evaluate technologies and vendors. We haven't kind of talked about sort of what I'm up to now, but um, it's sort of eye-opening to be on the other side of the table, like with retailers and brands sort of feeling their way through the headless architecture stacks and trying to figure
Mm.
out, okay, what payment gateway do I need? What catalog service do I need? That kind of all these different questions kind of get raised up for each of these sort of not like full e-commerce platform decisions, but they are like still important decisions that are being made. They're just sort of, I guess, a micro scale rather
Yeah,
than macro
they're
scale
chipping away at
decisions.
it.
Mm. And it's sort of yeah, it's a good way to approach like building out a business strategy. You can kind
Mm.
of set like an overarching roadmap, an overarching strategy of where you want to be like a year or two from now, and then you maybe implement the first piece, which is maybe the e-commerce like the critical path, product cart checkout order, and then you start adding additional components to that like shipping and tax, promotions, etc. Maybe you add the CMS, and things can kind of evolve over time, and you don't have to sort of have a big migration project that takes a year or two.
Mm,
And I think also that's sort of on the pre-existing companies that are migrating to headless stacks. I think there's the other side, which is sort of the greenfield opportunities where um, I think a lot of the greenfield opportunities at Molten, like those um, owners, founders, e-commerce like retailers and things, they've been burnt by like the monolithic platforms in the past and kind of didn't want to fall into the same trap again,
mm,
where they were limited by the platform features, functionalities, and sort of their plugin frameworks, and they kind of wanted to forge their own sort of destiny and path and sort of be
yeah.
in full control.
There's,
Um,
there's lots of trauma in e-commerce development and businesses where people have got to a point and then they either can't operate their business because the technology doesn't allow, or
mhm.
they've aged 10 years writing an integration for a client, and it's just
Yeah,
like way more
people
work
make
than I thought.
people make trade-offs, and I don't think they necessarily realize the trade-offs that they're making, quite what impact they're going to have a few years down the line. I sort of see it on the spectrum of sort of one side you have speed, like turnkey solutions like Shopify, and the other end of the spectrum you have control, and that's maybe Magento or something in the past, but now maybe that's more headless.
Mm,
And I think headless is sort of it's heading in the direction of the middle space, which is something the holy grail, the perfect middle, where you have a balance of both, where you can go really fast and you can have the control and flexibility. It's kind of strange because it kind of also addresses some of those weak points in SaaS, where typically SaaS is like you don't have as much control over your business logic. It's always out of a box somewhere in big box.
mhm,
Whereas now we have lots of smaller little boxes, which is kind of closed away. But then that allows a lot more flexibility and control because you can write code around those smaller boxes to like pull together a full sort of solution.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, that's a nice sort of visualization you said there for how headless uh, helps people build businesses. It's sort of like arranging those blocks, and then
mhm.
writing the road code around it. Um,
Yeah.
awesome. I think maybe a good thing to finish up on is more around headless. And I guess like headless isn't for everyone, but when do you think it like does it make sense? And you talked a little bit about the sort of green fields when you're building something from scratch, or when and like the idea of like start where you want to finish. I think it was what you said, but like to you, what are the prime candidates for the types of businesses or stage of business that should be considering headless pretty seriously?
Yeah, I guess I'll preface this with this is sort of based on my experience at Molten and sort
Sure.
of seeing customers that both were successful and those that maybe that weren't. And I think it comes down to I guess control again, back to that spectrum idea. So whether you need to control and build a customer experience on the front end, um, and you're trying to differentiate, with your branding or with the sort of the customer journey that someone's going through. Maybe a standard checkout flow isn't the right answer, and you want to introduce some additional fields or different steps. That's one potential sort of that's where you want to go headless, because you could go for like a traditional platform and you could spend a very long time sort of trying to fit your business model into the front end templates, which can be quite messy and quite time
Mm,
consuming. And then I guess on the other side, sort of these more complex use cases, these complex businesses that have a lot more logic and processes in place. So B2B would be a big one. So
mm,
international brands that are maybe doing multi-currency, multi-site. Obviously, with headless, you can have many sites, all in different languages and everything else powered with
mm,
like localized payment gateways and things. So that's kind of the other side of the coin, I guess. And that's also, I guess, like complex businesses and B2B can be categorized and subdivided. There's also sort of regulatory industries, so like heavily regulated goods. Um, so like in the US, for example, obviously some of the cannabis industry is heavily regulated, and there's a lot of sort of in-store experiences that are happening there, um, or even like medical care, healthcare goods and
mm,
services. Those things that require compliance and sort of have like strict restrictions around sort of customer data and that kind of thing. That you might not want to be able to put all of that data inside of a commerce platform, for example. That data might need to exist in another compliance system somewhere else,
yeah.
and then you're just building a simple cart or something alongside. So there's a few, I guess, examples there. Um,
I think also in like
but
in a post-COVID world, there's just like so many more people looking to buy online, and
mhm,
the standard way of doing it doesn't really fly anymore. Like you need to go like let's think about like older folks, maybe their checkout or their experience needs to be in bigger font, and whether you can determine that some way based on the types of sites that they've been visiting or some way,
Mhm.
or if you're just selling a product to that audience, you can really customize the shopping experience for like my grandma, and she's getting a really optimized front end experience that my little cousin is getting something very different. So
Yeah, I think that's the other side. Maybe it's the personalization aspect where
yeah,
a website can morph to a specific person's like, demographic data or past purchase history data, etc. It's a lot easier to do that with Headless
mm,
because you've got kind of that full control. And I guess that kind of like I guess on the COVID point a little bit too, sort of those in-store shopping experiences are changing too. Obviously, sort of contactless shopping, like curbside pickup, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Um, I think self checkout will be a big movement going forward. Sort of people not having to check out like in lines at tills as much because obviously there isn't a lot of space
mm,
for that. So allowing people to sort of check out with their mobile phones.
yeah, and
Sort
having
of.
that sort of blended experience between
Mm,
fully digital and people with masks behind a big screen. There's some nice interplay that flexible
mhm.
technology and front ends allow.
Yeah, definitely. I think sort of just being able to make use of the existing technologies that people have available in their pocket can lead to a lot of interesting commerce use cases.
Mm,
And there's a side to that where we tried it at Molten a little bit for these like customer experiences. We tried to push sort of self checkout a couple of years ago, and obviously like at that point we were kind of butting heads against sort of um, customer experience, like how knowledgeable and how sort of ingrained people's shopping habits are. Like it's the same story between sort of like a physical like checkout with a member of staff versus like a self checkout machine, where
mm,
there's a lot of resistance from like average customers to adopt those technologies, and they would only adopt those technologies if there was no other choice.
yeah, awesome.
And then I guess like COVID has like, done the same thing a little bit. Like, there's no other choice other than sort of online right now, and obviously as stores reopen,
Mm,
and they've sort of refactored their in-store experiences to kind of cope. Some of them obviously have self-checkout still, and others have like physical. But there's like I think there's opportunities there with like headless, obviously not just powering websites, but you can create in-store experiences
yeah.
that you couldn't do before.
Anything with a Wi-Fi chip, you can embed headless technologies.
Yeah, a lot of IoT use cases, and
Mm.
you could pair like beacons and all. You could do all sorts of crazy stuff in
Yeah.
stores now.
All right. Well, before we get too carried away, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks so
Perfect.
much for taking the time today, Adam, to chat. It's been super insightful and interesting to hear the genesis of Molten and that journey at the really sort of early stages of Headless. So really appreciate your time and educating all of us here around all of your knowledge. So thank you.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.